Every union that Cook is looking into seems to have more than its fair share of rotten eggs, and it seems to me that corruption is endemic also on the Labor side of politics. They, prior to the Fitzgerald inquiry concluding its report, were very keen to say that corruption was only contained on the Conservative side of politics. Clearly the Labor Party has its problems because its union support base is riddled with allegations of corruption, and Cook is displaying this day after day.
Should the government be embarrassed then by what we've heard so far?
Well, clearly it has plenty of reasons to be embarrassed. Many of the people against whom allegations have been made within the Cook inquiry have been openly endorsed by very senior members of the ALP only very recently.
When Cook brought down his last report, the government said certain parts of it should not be made public. Are you concerned about censorship this time?
Well, it happened once and it possibly can happen again, and we ask Goss and we ask his government to ensure that the full report is made public, just like the Fitzgerald inquiry, so that there can be no allegations or any suggestions that the government is hiding something from the public and from the Parliament.
Both Elton and Hardy, as well as a number of others in their team, have been convicted of offences in relation to their activities in the 1986 election. They're forbidden from holding office for 5 years. Yet they have not been shunned by their Labor colleagues. When Hardy appealed his conviction in the federal court last year, a number of Labor identities spoke up for his good character and integrity. They included ACTU President Martin Ferguson, Federal Labor MP Con Shaka, and Senator Bryant Burns.
I acted foolishly, and I would have to concede that in accordance with the law I acted improperly, but I believe that my motives were genuine.
Brian Elton now runs this service station, leased from a company called Union Petroleum. The secretary of that company is Deputy Premier Tom Burns.
Then raise the scarlet standard high, beneath its folds we'll live and die, though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
There are plenty of people on the Labor side of politics anxiously, even nervously awaiting the findings of the second part of Marshall Cook QC's report. But the revelations so far in relation to the conduct of ballots leave a heavy cloud over the commitment of the socialist left and indeed the whole Labor movement to the process of democracy, which is fundamental to the working of Australian society.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.
A special report from Alan Craig, Relations Minister Neville Warburton and Trades and Labour Council Secretary Ray Dempsey to appear on our program tonight. Both of them declined. Now, to the Gulf crisis, and as you probably heard on the news, US President George service station owned by a company called Union Petroleum. We further stated that the Deputy Premier, Tom Burns, was the Secretary of Union Petroleum. In that, we were wrong. The Secretary of Union Petroleum is in fact another man with the same name, Thomas J. Burns, who is not a member of the state Labor government. We unreservedly apologise for this error and any embarrassment it may have caused to Mr. Tom Burns, the Deputy Premier. And now, Goss opened the new police headquarters in Roma Street in Brisbane. After the formalities, Mr. Goss was approached by waiting journalists. Our own Greg Turnbull was among them.
Is there any problem with the political donations that have been received, apparently been received by 3 of the Labor members at the moment?
Not that I'm aware of, but if Mr. Cooper or anybody else can tell me of any illegality, then I'd be happy to look into the matter.
Mr. Cooper is also very concerned about the, attempts or so-called attempts for your government to close down the Cook inquiry and at the very least very negative remarks about the Cook inquiry. Can you give a guarantee that it won't be closed down prematurely?
The proof's in the pudding. Mr. Cooper has been moaning and whinging about closing down the Cook inquiry for 8 months. We've been in power for 8 months. The Cook inquiry is still going. It speaks for itself.
Will you be seeking any information from your Minister, Mr. Gibbs, in relation to his association with the Liquor Trades Union or any campaign funds from the Liquor Trades Union?
About what? About what?
Will you be seeking any information from him in relation to his association with previous officers, past officers of the Liquor Trade Union?
I'm not sure why. I mean, to what end?
As to his involvement with those officers during elections in which they were subsequently found to have been rorting ballots.
Are you suggesting that Mr Gibbs has broken any law or has broken any rule of conduct in any way?
I'm wondering if you'll be seeking from Mr Gibbs any information concerning his association with the Liquor Trade Union.
If you, from the 7:30 report, and Mr Cooper cannot nominate any law or rule of conduct that's been broken, then I really can't take that proposition seriously.
The Premier. And as you saw last night, our report contained Cook inquiry evidence which associated Sports and Tourism Minister Bob Gibbs with the discredited former leadership of the Queensland Liquor Trades Union. Mr Gibbs' Shadow Minister, Mick Vivers, said today that this evidence is a damning indictment of Mr Gibbs, which seriously questions his fitness as a minister. Today, Alan Craig, who followed the Cook inquiry story, put that to Mr Gibbs.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. In fact, Mr Vivers was the first person to ask me a question on the first sitting day of the Goss Labor government this year in the Parliament. I tabled my details of the donation for the Liquor Trades Union. The donation was never made to me personally, it was made to my local campaign committee, as were a number of business donations made. I have nothing to hide, it's an open book as far as I'm concerned.
Are you embarrassed now, though, that you endorsed Elton and Hardy and their chant?
No, not at all. I mean, I can only judge people on the way that they present to me and the way that I believe that they operate. I mean, at the time that I endorsed those people, I had an earnest and very, very honest belief that these were honest people who were doing their job competently. And as far as I'm concerned, that I did that at the time, and I was correct. The inquiry has shown otherwise. I'm certainly embarrassed to a degree about that, but I have no regrets about it.
Bob Gibbs. We again invited the Industrial Relations Minister, Mr Warburton, onto our program tonight, and again he declined, saying he'd done so because he was currently awaiting Mr Cook's second report, and he considered it inappropriate to comment on the matters being investigated by Mr Cook. But Opposition Industrial Relations spokesman Mr Neville Harper said Mr Warburton has questions which ought to be answered now. Mr Harper, thanks for your time. Our program last night disclosed some dubious ethical practices, but the Premier pointed out today that in the matter of political donations from unions to the ALP, we disclosed no illegalities. Would you agree with that?
Well, of course, the fact is that the Warburton-Goss government has changed the legislation in Queensland so that trade unions now can make donations from their members' funds to political parties without having the sanction of those trade union memberships. They did away, despite the Hanger report, they did away with the Political Objects Fund, which was part of the previous legislation.
But Mr Warburton points out that any donation from a union to the party these days must be disclosed. It must be a matter of public record. Isn't that a safeguard?
Not really, because that doesn't occur until the accounts are brought forward, until they're audited, and that by that time, of course, the trade union membership hasn't had an opportunity to express a point of view. The Hanger Committee, and both Mr Goss and Mr Warburton made much of supporting Hanger and implementing his recommendations, but they didn't implement the recommendation that said that Section 57A regarding the Political Objects Fund should remain in place. They very conveniently, for their own purposes, obviously decided that they didn't need that section any longer.
Do you have any evidence that unions or unionists themselves are unhappy about this new legislation?
They certainly are unhappy, and I've had representations from the Federal Clerks Union members, and important members within that union, because they were promised in 1982, 1984, 1985 by the present Secretary of the branch that they would be given an opportunity for a vote for a referendum of all members before that particular union affiliated with a political party. But now, with the passing of the Warburton legislation, the Federal Clerks Union in central and southern Queensland has decided, not through the membership, but by their council members, to affiliate with the Labor Party and to make a very substantial affiliation donation to that party, straight out of union members' funds without any reference to the membership itself.
Neville Harper. The Liberals parliamentary leader, Denver Beanland, didn't miss his opportunity to weigh into the debate today. He fears the government may try to censor Mr Cook's latest report. Mr Beanland, thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Aren't you
Alan.
jumping the gun by suggesting that the Cook inquiry report is going to be censored at this early stage?
Certainly not. We saw the first inquiry report censored, in fact, and that was purely into ALP officials. Now we've had the public disclosure of 2 cabinet ministers plus another state member of the ALP, a backbencher, being in fact included in the Cook inquiry over the Liquor Trades Union. I think there's every reason for concern out there that the Goss ALP government will censor the second report of the Cook inquiry. I think it's a major concern to all Queenslanders, and therefore I think I'm very justified in calling on Mr Goss to challenge him, in fact, to state publicly to the people of Queensland he won't do to the second report exactly what they did to the first report.
Can you understand, though, if people are going to be charged as a result of this report, isn't it fair that the words used should not prejudice their trial?
Now look, we had the Fitzgerald inquiry. It named names, a whole host of names, hundreds of pages of names. There is no difference with the Cook inquiry. We know that the first report was censored because it caused political damage to the ALP. It gave some indication that the ALP, in fact, delayed the proceedings of the first inquiry by Mr Cook because it could have been damaging to the ALP's state election results. They delayed it because of that. We're now looking at the second report, which mentions ALP cabinet ministers, ALP members of parliament. And I think that's pretty significant. And therefore, there's every reason to suspect that the ALP will again censor the second report.
Denver Beanland. Also today, the solicitor retained by the Liquor Trades Union, Tim Carberry, told the 7:30 report that in evidence to the Commission, it was accepted that money paid to him included disbursements payable to others, including barristers. Well, moving away from Queensland to Victoria. And if it was Queensland's turn for political upheaval last year,
massive frauding and forgery has occurred.
These people have got to go, Barry, under Justice Moore's orders. There we are. The officials have got to be out of here.
Postie, who blew the whistle on his own union and started a savage war. Behind the struggle for power in the Communication Workers Union is a catalogue of dirty tricks. Graft, forgery, rigged elections, standover tactics, even suggestions of a political conspiracy. It's left a powerful union bitterly divided, but Australia Post officials didn't want to know about it.
These people have got to go, Barry, under Justice Moore's orders. There we are. The officials have got to be out of here.
This is how our humble postal union became a battleground after serious allegations of corruption exploded last month.
Massive frauding and forgery has occurred.
I want them out. I have no power in this place. Well, let us in and we'll push them out.
The current union, the executive that's in there now, got in by fraudulent means.
If you want to call the police, I invite you to do so.
We will, Barry. Let us in and we'll call.
Justice Moore has referred the matter of forged ballot papers to forensic investigators.
These union officials were dumped at their last election, only to later find out the ballot box had been rigged. Now they're storming their own headquarters, armed with a court order.
I want them out, Barry, under Justice Moore's orders.
According to Justice Moore of the Industrial Relations Court, the July 1994 New South Wales election for the Communication Workers Union had been a total sham.
Well, the most damning piece of evidence was, of course, the uncontested proof of 936 ballot papers that had been proven to be filled out by no more than half a dozen people.
Evidence of standover tactics and vote rigging in the postal and telecommunications industry had been rife. One of the people responsible for blowing the lid off this scandal was Quentin Cook, a 36-year-old postman from the Blue Mountains.
I have to ask you this question. You've ever been bitten by a dog?
Only the once, but he recovered.
But you've been bitten by a few other things in the last 18 months, 2 years, haven't you?
I certainly have. More savage than dogs, I can tell you.
Quentin Cook had smelled a rat long before the election. To confirm his suspicions, he decided to create union history.
John Howard was then the shadow Minister for Industrial Relations, and I simply did nothing more than contact him and discuss the ideas I had about running a Liberal Party ticket in a trade union election. And he grabbed the opportunity with both hands.
Quentin's attempt at becoming the first Liberal to gain union office was thwarted by the election he now knows he could never have won.
There were people at Raw Square and Telecom, Telstar, that had their ballot papers forged, and when we went and asked these people did they vote, they said we never got a ballot paper. They came before the court. and said they never got a ballot paper, yet their names were recorded as a vote.
Noel Batiste, a union organiser at the time of the '94 election, blew the whistle on his union's corruption. Others were quick to confirm his suspicions.
Several people came to me as a delegate complaining about being approached and hassled to hand over a blank ballot paper to them.
A union delegate at Sydney's Eastern Suburbs Mail Centre, Sid Parisi, confirmed members handed over their votes to Australia Post shift changers. If they didn't, they risked a roster change and a move to antisocial working hours.
In my centre, there was a case of one person on the night shift who put in a written complaint about being approached and hassled for ballot papers. He asked for help from the manager and an inquiry was held by the manager, and he was put on a shift that was very inconvenient for him, very difficult.
So how many mail officers are there in the Eastern Suburbs Mail Centre, and how many of their votes were extracted in this fashion?
There are about 500, and they bragged about collecting 200 ballot papers.
Right under the noses of Australia Post management, 40% of the union membership in one mail centre handed over their votes under duress. The matter has now been raised in the Senate.
Justice Moore found evidence of fraud across the entire system of major metropolitan mail centres of Australia Post.
It's quite obvious that certain elements within Australia Post have known about this vote rigging for quite some time, and yet they've turned a blind eye. When we asked them for an interview to answer these allegations, they sent us a raft of letters threatening us with legal action if we chose to go ahead with this story. One of the questions we wanted to ask was it possible for the then ALP government to have exerted any pressure to influence the outcome of this election?
The magnitude that was done in '94 could not have been done without the help of people in high places. It's impossible.
So a conspiracy between the ALP and Australia Post?
I believe so, yes. Yes.
That's fairly a damning statement.
Oh, it's a true statement.
Whistleblower Noel Batiste is also a past president of the CWU. He says he can trace corrupt ballots back to the late 1960s.
Noel, there have been 14 elections since you joined Australia Post. Are you suggesting that all of them were rigged?
I believe so, yes.
Now we'll close the door.
Hang on. Noel Batiste is in charge of the union as of this moment.
I'll get the police here.
When Justice Moore handed down his findings, he ordered a new election be called this September, and for all candidates who had sought office at the '94 election to submit samples of their handwriting. Comparisons could then be made with the forged voting forms.
But, sir, surely it's best to talk now and explain if there have been allegations. Do you think those allegations are fair?
All those would-be union officials who failed at the '94 ballot willingly complied with the court order. But the 12 members who took office after the fraudulent election, including the union's president Bob Cornish, declined to submit handwriting samples.
You do not have the rights under the official status that I have.
Despite a court order, these deposed officials are now having difficulty exercising their caretaker rights until a new election can be called. Meanwhile, Quentin Cook has to wait.
Halfway through the inquiry, I was in fact dismissed for discourtesy.
After an 18-year unblemished record, the postman who blew the whistle was fired last November. He's now appealing against what he claims is an unfair dismissal. He wants to get straight back to work and not just delivering the mail.
And you still want to head up this union?
Yes, I do. I do.
You can bring about changes and right all the wrongs?
Hopefully I can. But I'm sure that once the membership, and this is very, very important now, once the membership are alerted to the deficiencies of the system and the advantage that unscrupulous individuals can take of that particular system, I'm sure that together we can rectify it.